11,000 years ago, in the sun-scorched hills of what is now southern Turkey, a group of people built something that should not have existed.
Ceased identifying separately. In many cases, assimilation was complete within a few generations. By the 18th and 19th centuries, families carrying Vlach ancestry might speak Serbian fluently, practice Serbian Orthodox
Behind them, nothing that our understanding of history said should have been there yet. When archaeologists first uncovered Göbekli Tepe, it didn't just surprise them, it forced them to rewrite the entire story of human
surrounding culture. What the Vlachs left behind was not always a clear documentary trail, it was often genetic. The Tesla paternal haplogroup appears consistent with populations that followed this trajectory, entering the military frontier with Vlach patrilineal ancestry, integrating into Serbian Orthodox life across generations, adopting language and identity fully, and eventually producing a priest, Milutin Tesla, whose public role embodied Serbian religious and cultural tradition. Nothing in the family's visible life would have suggested an alternate origin, not the name, not the faith, not the profession, not the language. The surface identity was Serbian in every practical sense. The deeper past may have been more layered. The surname Tesla offers an additional linguistic detail. The word refers to an adze, a woodworking tool. Variants of the term exist in both South Slavic and Vlach Romanian vocabulary, each inherited from earlier Latin layers introduced during Roman rule in the Balkans. The name alone proves nothing. Occupational surnames cross cultural lines easily, but alongside genetic data, it becomes another small piece in a larger pattern. Individually, such details carry limited weight. Together, they form a consistent direction. Tesla's maternal line tells a different story. Mitochondrial DNA tracing the direct female ancestry of the Mandic family shows markers associated with the ancient Dinaric substrate of the Western Balkans, one of the oldest detectable genetic layers in southeastern Europe. These maternal ancestors did not arrive in a medieval migration wave. They were already there. While populations moved, consolidated, and assimilated around them, the maternal line appears to reflect deep continuity in the Dinaric Alps region, stretching back beyond written history. The contrast between the two lineages echoes the contrast Tesla himself described between his parents. His father, structured, literate, embedded in formal religious hierarchy. His mother, intuitive, inventive, gifted with tools and memory without formal schooling. Tesla credited his inventive abilities to her in his memoirs. Whether or not such traits map genetically is speculative, but symbolically the convergence is striking. Two different ancestral trajectories meeting in a frontier household in the mid-19th century and producing one of the most unconventional minds of the modern age. Researchers involved in these findings emphasize caution. No direct DNA sample exists from Tesla. The connection relies on collateral descendants. Haplogroup analysis is probabilistic, identifying likely population affiliations rather than certainties. Population overlaps complicate clean conclusions. The findings have not yet appeared in a peer-reviewed journal. The scientists present their work as a beginning, not a final verdict. Independent replication, larger sample sets, and further archival discoveries could refine or adjust the picture. But the divergence from the expected South Slavic cluster is measurable, and the historical record of Vlach integration into Serbian Orthodox frontier communities is well documented in Habsburg administrative records, church archives, and demographic research. The evidence stands not alone. Genetic signals, linguistic traces, and regional migration history intersect. What emerges is a story more layered than the simplified biography. Nikola Tesla was Serbian in language, faith, culture, and self-identification. He lived as Serbian, died as Serbian, and contributed to the world as Serbian. None of this revises that lived reality, but at the level of deep ancestry, beyond parish registers and national identity, the paternal line may have followed a path older and more complex than previously described. The immigrant inventor who gave America alternating current may have carried multiple historical currents within his own lineage. The standard biography was never false, it was simply focused on the final visible layer. And for generations, the Kennedy family built their identity on a single origin story. Irish Catholic immigrants fleeing the famine, arriving in Boston with nothing, rising through grit and ambition to the highest office in America. It became the foundation of JFK's political brand, repeated in campaign speeches and immortalized in tributes. Then, in 2017, a genealogist examining parish records in Ireland noticed something that didn't quite fit. And in 2023, when researchers finally obtained DNA from authenticated Kennedy family artifacts, the results appeared to challenge more than a century of accepted history. But the contradiction wasn't what anyone expected. The story begins not in County Wexford, where the Kennedys long claimed their roots, but in the baptismal records of Dunganstown Parish in 1823. Patrick Kennedy was born to a farming family in the townland of Dunganstown. Records identify his father as John Kennedy, a tenant farmer. In 1849, at the height of the Great Famine, Patrick boarded a ship to Boston. He was 26 years old. He worked as a cooper, married Bridget Murphy, and died of cholera in 1858, leaving behind 5 children. One of them, Patrick Joseph Kennedy, became a successful saloon owner and Massachusetts state legislator. His son, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., became one of the wealthiest men in America, and his grandson became the 35th President of the United States. The Irish ancestry was never seriously questioned. Every genealogist who examined the records confirmed the line back to Dunganstown. American and Irish historians treated it as settled fact. The documentation appeared airtight. Birth records, marriage certificates, immigration manifests, all pointing to an unbroken chain of Irish Catholic heritage stretching back through rural Wexford. In 1963, President Kennedy visited Ireland and stood near the Kennedy ancestral homestead. He planted a tree. He shook hands with distant cousins. The nation embraced him as one of their own. Newspapers carried the story across Ireland and America. It was a moment of validation, the immigrant's grandson returning to honor his roots. But no one had ever tested the DNA. In 2017, genealogist Helen Moss was researching 19th-century immigration patterns for the Irish Genealogical Society when she cross-referenced ship manifests with parish marriage records. She noticed something unusual. Patrick Kennedy's mother's maiden name appeared in the Dunganstown baptismal register as Johanna Kennedy. But in the Wexford Diocese Marriage Index from 1820, a Johanna Kennedy married a man named John Kennedy in a ceremony witnessed by 2 families who shared no obvious connection. Multiple Kennedy families lived in that region, and the surname was common. The assumption had always been that John Kennedy of Dunganstown belonged to one of the established local Kennedy lineages, but the marriage record hinted at something less straightforward. Johanna's family came from Adamstown, about 7 miles away, and the witness signatures included a surname that did not appear in the surrounding townlands. Moss began examining additional records, land transfers, tax rolls, parish censuses. John Kennedy's name appeared alongside Johanna and her family, but not independently before 1820. For a man living in rural Ireland at that time, that absence was unusual. Most people left some trace, a baptism, a tenancy record, a family connection. Yet John Kennedy seemed to appear only at the moment of his marriage. The questions grew. Who were his parents? Where had he been baptized? What family did he belong to? Then came the DNA. In 2023, a research team at Trinity College Dublin collaborated with the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. They were granted access to authenticated personal items from the Kennedy family, including a comb and preserved clothing fragments. Originally cataloged as historical artifacts, these items were never intended for genetic testing, but advances in extraction techniques made it possible to retrieve DNA from even minimal biological traces. The researchers extracted mitochondrial DNA, which traces the maternal line, and Y chromosome DNA, which follows the direct paternal line from father to son. They compared the results with genetic databases, including samples from families still living in Dunganstown who maintain detailed genealogical records. The mitochondrial DNA aligned exactly as expected. The maternal line traced back to Johanna Kennedy's family in Adamstown, consistent with long-established Gaelic-Irish ancestry. The Y chromosome results, however, were different. Kennedy men in Dunganstown today, descendants of relatives who remained in Ireland, did not share the same paternal haplogroup as the American Kennedy line. The lineages had diverged. That suggested one of two possibilities. Either a break in paternity had occurred somewhere along the line, or John Kennedy of Dunganstown